Hello, everyone. You're going to see in your chat box here in just a second a link to sign in for today's discussion.
You should be coming through my screen.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Awesome. Awesome. Go ahead, Allison.
Sorry. Welcome, everyone. I'm Allison Pearson. I'm the Assistant Regional Superintendent here at the ROE for Boone and Winnebago County. We have a lot of people both from our region and out of the region, so welcome, everyone. We're very excited to have everyone here today. You're going to see in your chat box that we have put in the sign-in sheet. If you could just go to that link and sign in for the day, and then that will help us get your evaluation and PDCs at the end. So welcome to Order, Disorder, Reorder, Processing Trauma Experienced by Staff and Students. You know, we had to open up this session because our first session filled right away, and which was amazing and great. And we just finished that a little bit ago, and we had really great discussion. So what led us to having this today is just people wanting to get to the end point, wanting to know, how can we get back to everything after, our lives have kind of been disrupted since March 17th. What's our new normal? What are we going to do when school resumes, if school resumes? So we reached out to Kevin Polky to help us develop a process within our own organizations as we're putting these plans together. And Kevin Polky is the founder and executive director of KP Counseling in Rockford. He has 30 years of experience as a clinical social worker. He works primarily with school districts, churches, and businesses on topics of mental health, self-care, culture development, and team building. 3 years ago, Kevin founded the Shatter Our Silence, which raises awareness and educates young adults, their significant others, and the professionals that work with them on the factors that lead to young adult suicide. Kevin was raised in this community. He's very passionate about helping educators in our schools, and we're honored and privileged to have him join us today. We're going to be running this kind of in a podcast style. Chris Collins is our Assistant Director for School Improvement here at the ROE, and Kevin and him are going to engage in more of a dialogue for the first 45 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions. But during this dialogue, please just, jot your questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer those, throughout the discussion. But there'll be time at the end to have more discussion. We're going to keep everyone muted at this time, but when we go to that discussion part at the end, we'll unmute you so you can ask your questions and engage in that conversation too. If you keep your video on, that would be great. If you can't have your video on for some reason, that's fine too. We know everybody is trying to manage a lot of things right now. Take breaks as needed, and again, just put any questions you have in the chat box.
Yeah, this is a dialogue. And we actually had our first session just to end a few minutes ago, and it went really, really well. And what we found to be really successful is that people were engaging in the conversation in the chat box. So during this time, if you want to engage with us and encourage others and encourage some of the questions, or you want us to kind of expand on a point, please, we're monitoring the chat box, and we'll use that to actually help guide our conversation. And so a part of this work came from, I meet with a bunch of principals across the nation remotely in Zoom, and a lot of the principals across the nation were talking about, our administrators were talking about the concern of handling the change. This change was thrust upon us, and what are we doing? And so in that meeting, I just started brainstorming, and we worked with Kevin this fall, and he just has that school background. He was a coach. He just gets it. And so we reached out to him and said, hey, what do you think about doing this for our communities? And so we released this to our communities, and what we're finding is that we're having people across the nation join because of the power of social media. So we're really excited about having you here. Remember, your ideas or your thoughts will be monumental to us actually moving forward to provide better support. We have a save the date coming up in August 12th. We're going to do a summit around handling change and implementing the new normal coming up August 12th. You'll all get an invite to that. And so a lot of the questions, a lot of the dialogue that comes from this, we're copying it down and we're going to be using it to kind of guide that too as well. So we're making sure we're responding to your needs. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing well, doing well. I was very excited with this, to meet with this group. The last group we met with, very engaging, asked a lot of great questions, and then and it was, from what we talked about afterwards, was some of the support that they were giving each other through the chat room. That was pretty cool. But your point to this particular piece of just starting the discussion about what is going on right now with us, as well as what can we look at toward the future, is really what we want to be able to do, is collect some data right now. We have some ideas, but as we know, ideas that aren't being supported with what's really going on, we need not only our ideas, but what's really happening to have the best the product come August. And that's really what you guys giving us some feedback would be, is going to be really helpful for that.
What really I did enjoy, and I'm going to enjoy this again, this kind of takes on a life of its own, but question I have, and a question that's on everyone's heart that I talk to about this is, we're in this whole new thing of remote learning and remote instruction, and we've been kind of socially isolated, not socially isolated, but physically isolated. And, as we start to think about, okay, this is a situation, it's kind of over, we're going to go back to normal. What does that going to look like? You use the terms order, disorder, reorder. What is that normal or that reorder? What does that kind of look like? And how can you help me process through that?
Well, I think for me, the idea that because of the extent of how long we've been going through this, I don't necessarily believe that we can go back to how it was March 1st, or that first week in March. So this idea of going back to normal, I don't think that that's necessarily a good aspiration. So that's when we use this idea. Well, and I think it's going to be unfounded, because we spent too much time away from that time period. So it's really about, and we can call it whatever, different things, either a new normal, or we can call it reorder, that it's really about going through this process and creating this new, what is the new normal or the reorder going to look like in the future, but really kind of maybe even rejecting the idea of making a choice to say, no, it's not going to be like it was before, because we've gone through too much during this time period to put it all back in. That idea of, there's been too much toothpaste that's come out of the tube. We can't get it all back in the tube.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we use the terms order, disorder, reorder in our title, and that's kind of what we were talking about with change being thrust upon us. Can you kind of give us an operational definition of order, disorder, and reorder, just so as a group we can kind of get on the same page and kind of get behind those concepts?
Sure. For me, where that really kind of originated from is that I've been studying Joseph Campbell's work over the last couple decades. And to be real honest, the first time I was introduced to it, I was very intrigued by it, but it was like way over my head. I mean, it was just like, I liked the concepts, but I couldn't really internalize them outside of a conceptual of it, the concepts of it. But specifically with what we're talking about today is Joseph Campbell's work with the phrase or the work of the hero's journey, and which many people are familiar with, because that is the template in which good movies and good stories are created. And I know many, if not all, the educators are very familiar with that template. And his work, real simplistically, is this idea of we're in a normal, and either because of restlessness or something happens, we move from that normal and we go over this chasm into this initiation phase, or the dark night of the soul. And in there, we face things that we wouldn't face, or we've avoided facing back in the normal. And many things happen in that time period, that sacred space. Mentors come in, helpers come in, but most importantly, we have to face things. We have to face our own fears, our own things that we've been trying to or have been able to avoid. And then through that, we take that gold or that prize that we found with that hard work we've done in that initiation phase, and we return home. Richard Rohr, a writer and speaker and theologian, also rephrased that same template, and he called it order, disorder to reorder. And I think for us, maybe that's a little bit more user friendly as far as the terminology goes. But that's really where I know for myself, when I've had major changes in my life, either personally, family-wise, business-wise, that either before I knew that it was time for some type of change happening with the business or whatever, I knew that it was time, and that fear of not wanting to go through it usually led me to resist that, because change comes sometimes uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable. So, but knowing that there's a template in which I can work through, and a template that I know has been there longer than I have, allowed me to have the courage to step over that chasm. In our particular case, February was our normal, right? And beginning of March was this normal, and we all individually and collectively got thrust into this disorder.
Mm-hmm.
For us, this is the only time in my lifetime this has ever happened. And to this extent, the closest thing for me would be living through 9/11, and there was things in that disorder that happened as well. But this is even different than that, because when 9/11 happened, that happened in New York.
Yes.
And I had people that I knew that were there and stuff, but I still could go to restaurants. And even though there was that concern when I opened up the mail, if some of you remember the fears of anthrax in the mail and those different things that had the residual effect of the terrorism that happened afterwards, there still was a level that I could put my foot in my normal. This is different. This is something that has thrown everything up and has disrupted, has affected and disrupted many, many areas of our life, if not almost all areas.
I'm just going to be vulnerable out there, because the terms that I'm hearing, I kind of look for patterns in terms and words, and thrust and disequilibrium and things put upon us. Sometimes, change is, we make a change. We just want to change. We want to change jobs, or we want to change the food we eat. We have somewhat control over that. And I guess that's what I'm feeling right now in this conversation is, I don't like this feeling of not having control. So I'm kind of always looking forward to the light at the end of the tunnel. What is that reorder? And if I were just to be truth be known, I'd like it to go back the way it was. So Kevin, why do I emotionally want to go there?
I think, and I agree with you, by the way. There was, especially early on, there was this temptation that I kept on getting sucked into, that I wanted it just to be, I remember when it first came out that we were going to have 2 weeks, that we were going to have, before schools restarted, like an extended spring break or something. Mm-hmm. And I think, first of all, I thought, how am I going to do this for 2 weeks? That was going to be hard enough. And then it was almost as if I was like, I'm not a runner by any means, but it was like how I would be if I was running a mile race. I'm going to still try to get it done as quickly as possible, and kind of like, well, not literally, but like hold my breath through it until I can get through it. And then quickly I was realizing that this is a little bit more like a marathon, and I have to figure out a pace. Yeah. So I think it, at least for me, and it sounds like you too, Chris, is that this idea of wanting it to go back to the way it was as quickly as possible, as painless as possible. Yes. I think that's just for me, I think it's just a natural thing that we want to do, because we're familiar there, we're comfortable there, and now all these unknowns is just emotionally throwing a lot of us in a tailspin. Um, and I think that needs to be, we need to acknowledge that. Like for me, I had to acknowledge that I'm not gonna be able to just get through this. I had to figure out a pace so I can go through it. So I had to start asking myself different questions that would help me think about it instead of just getting through it, such as what opportunity is going to come out of this chaos. What things could I learn in this that I wouldn't learn if this wasn't happening? And the longer this has been going on, the more relevant for me is to keep those questions at the forefront of my mind and with my staff.
Again, I just want to encourage people to add in this chat because, I kind of feel like all vulnerable in that I'm out there all by myself feeling this way. And if you can, if this resonates with you, just add something in the chat so we can kind of add to our discussion. But again, this being uncomfortable, you said something about opportunities, opportunities during this time. And so what does disorder look like? What I'm feeling, can you put some words to how I'm feeling?
Well, so I think whenever we get thrust into disorder, it can be a lot of different ways, and again, disorder doesn't always mean, or change doesn't always mean bad things. I mean, one of the greatest things that I've gotten to experience is being a parent. And I have a 24-year-old son, a 21-year-old daughter, and even though it was a long time ago when they were children, or babies, I remember that very distinctly. We not only planned it, right? We were very intentional about doing that, but man, for anybody who knows a parent, we were scared. We had no idea what we were doing. This little thing came home with us, and no matter how much we prepared the house, it was live, right? And that was a good change, but nonetheless, everything was different in a lot of ways for my wife and I. And then we had to, like, all those books that we bought, that were great for the pregnancy part, they went like out the window when it came to like taking care of another being that was completely dependent on us. And I think in some ways that is an example of what happens in disorder, right? We're thrust into something and everything is upside down. The North Star doesn't seem to be in the north. I can't find it right now. And everything seems to be off. And in this case, at least my experience has been, I don't even know who to trust, right? I mean, I don't even know, or I should say, I don't know what to trust. Like if I watch the media, what media should I trust to know? And that may have been going on before, but it sure seems to have been amplified for me during this time period. So then I've had to learn to dig down and go how far, into more what my intuition says is more maybe a possibility of a greater truth, and then how to avoid the distractions that may be coming up on someone playing doctor on Facebook or playing, those types of things. And so, because that activates all that fear that I might have been able to easily avoid before, that was in my old familiar or normal. And so I think for me, it's been those types of things. Financially, fear, I had from the middle of March to the middle of May, I had minimally 2 to 3 speaking engagements or school districts I was working with. And with that, just like that, they all disappeared. And so I had more time to work with clients. I had more time to work with my staff, but then there was that loss of being able to interact with those educators in those districts that I was going to work with. And then the fear is, am I ever going to be able to do it again? So I think that's an example. And let alone people who the fear that has led to the reality that someone they know in their circle has died, maybe because of the virus, or sad because they died during this time period and I wasn't being able to be with them. We had a family friend of ours who, during this time period, when it first happened, he was diagnosed with brain cancer, and 6 weeks later he died. And I was able to visit with him twice, but I wasn't able to be with the family or be with him like I normally would be. And I think that's unfortunately another casualty of this disorder that's been happening right now.
Yeah, just something as simple as there's a point that was just made in the chat box about just going to the store. And I thought that going to the store was a relatively easy thing. And now I go there and people are wearing masks, and I find myself kind of avoiding eye contact. And I'm losing that sense of community with even people that I bump into. And how do I manage through that? I try to smile at times with people, but they can't see me because I have a mask on. And so it's just this awkwardness. And then, how do I manage that? Because again, I'm struggling just with that whole mask thing. And then all of a sudden I'm at the store and I don't want to maintain eye contact with people. And that's just not who I am.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Chris, you make a great, I think that's an example of where something that we wouldn't necessarily think comes bubbling up, right? This idea that when we're in this disorder, we may have thought we had stuff in boxes that we're okay with. And now we're things have changed, and stuff that we thought were taken care of now starts bubbling back up. And that could be old behaviors, that could be insecurities, that could be whatever. And I agree with you. For me, this sounds weird, but going to the grocery store is part of my social life, right? I like,
Mine too.
You go to the community, I can socialize with people that I don't know, or maybe someone that I come across that I do know, and I just enjoy that process. I can't say that I've been enjoying it the same degree, and that's on me. I have to necessarily kind of work through that, because who Kevin's been his entire life is a social person and enjoy doing that and opportunities to interact with people. Why am I getting in the way? What's getting in the way? I don't like being told I have to wear a mask. But the truth is that for a while I didn't wear a mask until it was until we were supposed to, right?
Yes.
By the governor. And so, but I remember the weekend before that came out, it was like whatever Sunday, I was at the grocery store, and I walk up to put my groceries away and did what you said. I naturally just smiled at the person who was there. She was all masked up and everything. And I go to smile at her, and through her mask, she gave me a dirty look. Now, I don't know for sure what that was about, but I took it as if it was because I didn't have a mask on.
Okay.
One of the social pressures that I felt a week later when I went out was that I'm going to be ostracized if I'm not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
That was weird.
Yeah.
I mean, I already get looked at funny because I have long hair and tattoos and earrings and all that stuff, but this was a little bit different. And so now I'm wearing a mask when I go out, and I'm dealing with the frustration of not being able to breathe, my glasses fogging up, not being able to smile, last week I was thinking, I don't know, all right, I got to do this, but I'm going to try to do this as little as possible. And that was a sadness for me, because this is something that I wouldn't say I look forward to, but it's something that I've embraced and enjoyed. That's on me to fix that. That's on me. How can I still be Kevin?
Yeah.
Even though I have these restrictions on me and I don't like them, what am I going to do to make them? Because I know me, when I'm in that space, I fight it. Yeah. And when I'm fighting something that I'm not going to change, then it's about me figuring out how can I get to that acceptance part of it.
Yeah, how do we do that? I mean, you're talking about fighting things, and I'm talking about just feeling sad or, feeling grief. Can you kind of talk about cycles of grief a little bit?
So I think, and I think for us as educators, you know, and especially like specifically for me, when I can find a template to work off of, you know, that somebody else has done the hard work of doing the research around something, and then I can use that template to then work off of, similar to Campbell's work with the hero's journey. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she did a lot of work around the idea of what are some of the things that people who are terminal and dying, what are some of the things they're going through, and that's when she wrote her 5 stages of grief. And in that, she was very clear, though, that these are descriptive stages, not prescriptive, which of course my initial resistance is, I want them to be prescriptive so I can check them off and then go on to the next stage and I know where I stand on it. But in reality, it's descriptive, meaning it describes what we may be going through in different stages. David Kessler came in and worked with Ross, and they worked together to expand it into grieving, not just for individuals that were terminal, and the grieving loss in general, not just death, but sometimes death of something or a loss of something. It could be a divorce, it could be a career or a job, or it could be what we're going through right now. And so in the midst of it, I was looking for what was another template that I can work through to help describe or give words to what I may be going through. And for me, I definitely went, the first stage is denial.
Yes.
And I went through that. I mean, I remember, you know, March 11th, I'm looking on my phone, pops up about 9 o'clock at night, and it said the NBA was postponing their season.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, get out of here. This is a hoax. And then
Yes.
they're talking about air flight, you know, airlines getting changed or something like that. But there was a part of me that went like, I remember watching the movie a long time ago, back in the 80s, New Dawn, and that and that movie scared me because of World War III happening. And I remember that same fear came up with me, but then I quickly got back to a TV program because I didn't want to feel that fear.
Okay.
And so I just denied what I saw on my phone or the feeling that I was feeling. Well, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead and finish.
No, and then the next day, obviously, with NCAA, you know, canceling, and St. Patrick's Day canceling, and the restaurants, you know, and obviously, you know, things changed pretty quickly, and I was, you know, that changed my denial pretty quickly regarding that, because there's too much for me to not be able. I couldn't play that story in my head, and we just talked about, you know, that times when I've been angry during this because I'm not able to go to a restaurant. Yeah. And then later I'm sad because I'm not able to go out to eat with my family. Or I'm bargaining, going, you know, if I'm just really good and if I just do everything they say, and if I just, then maybe this will end. It for sure can't go on past Mother's Day. There's no way if I just, and that's all that bargaining, at least for me, that I've found myself doing and had to just be aware of that's what I was doing. You know, the last stage that she talks about is acceptance. I'm working on that, but I keep on getting thrust sometimes back into sadness or anger or whatever. And Kessler brought in, and I think this is important, Kessler brings in, because of his work and his contribution, was that the 6th stage of grieving is meaning. And I really think in the midst of those stages that we go through during the grief process, that's really the work that happens in the disorder phase of what we're going through. For different people for different things. And at some point, the meaning is that gold that we're going to bring into the reorder. It's when I think of meaning, that's really where I started the Shadow of Silence suicide prevention program. Was Xavier Whitford's son was one of the 3 individuals that died from my son's class, graduating class, and she became a mental health advocate in the midst of her grief. As a result of her grief, it doesn't bring Tommy back, but it allows her to make meaning out of her pain. And I think that's what Kessler meant with the grieving process, and finding and getting to that space. It's not it's not lessening the loss,
Okay.
but it is somewhere as we go through it, where is there something to take out of it?
You know what? Just in knowing the audience that we have in the room, self-care and understanding this ourselves is really, really important, and it's great information. But how do we start? Aisha kind of asked a question about trying to see this pandemic through the eyes of her 3-year-old daughter. If I were to expand on that a little bit, or how are we to build empathy through the eyes of our students through this whole process? What should we look for? What would be your suggestion when we take this to a student context, our own children context?
Um, I think it's like many things. It starts with us.
Okay.
That we have to first be cognizant of our own journey, so that we then can be best prepared and best prepared to be present for either the children in our household or the children in our classroom. If we don't do the work on us, then it's going to be harder for us to be present when we're in front of them.
Yes.
Because something's going to pop up and get in the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to, in the midst of it, I'm going to become fearful. So I think you talked about the word empathy. Well, what is empathy? Sympathy, I can be at a stage, I can be here and look down on someone and feel bad for them, and I can sympathize in their situation. But empathy means that I'm being here and recognizing that I recognize that what you're feeling, because it reminds me of what I've experienced too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole different space that you're creating when you do that. And there's a level of authenticity and integrity when we can do that. So even some of the stories that we've been exchanging right now, there's probably a handful of people that have experienced something similar in the grocery store or at Lowe's or wherever they've been. And that's empathy.
Mm.
Right. And or their own, will say something, and then that triggers and remembers their frustration or anger or sadness, or denial. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's empathy. And so as we practice that, when our children in our home come to us, or grandchildren, whatever it may be, we're able to create a space to hear them and see them, and maybe resist just getting them out of that space. I think empathy
Yes.
is about being in the space with them, not just trying to rescue them from it.
So it's interesting that you're talking about that rescue versus educators tend to be fixers. I know I am. Just ask my wife,
Yeah.
which goes over like a lead brick. But uh, from what I'm hearing, though, is like this change is here. I can't change that the change happened. That I should be okay with this sense of a disorder. Is that what you're saying? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Be okay with pain. Okay. Be okay with uncomfortableness. You're right. I'm just trying to figure out if I'm actually agreeing with you. But I mean, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, because my tendency is to want to resist it. My tendency is
Yes.
kind of like, I've thought before, is that I wanted to get through this. Right. I wanted to hurry up and get through this. And I recognized that this extended spring break was not going to happen. And I had to figure out a pace to get through it, and so then I had to figure out, how am I going to be, again, this is happening. It's not going to go back. It's not going to go away just because I don't like it. What am I going to do with it? And for me, it's always better for Kevin if he looks at it as an opportunity for growth, as I mentioned earlier, than it is just to endure it. For Kevin, if I'm just trying to get through it, I have a tendency, other aspects of me tend to go into victim stance.
Mm-hmm.
If I set myself up by going, how can I grow from this?
Okay.
Then I have a tendency to have a different type of energy about it,
Mm-hmm.
and seem to, not get in my own way or get stuck. And now that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's just, how long do I stay there? You know, because I'm going to have slips. I'm going to step backwards, but it's my responsibility of how I'm going to manage my way through that. Similar to the grocery store the other day, and being frustrated because I had to wear a mask. It's not fair for me to take that out on the checkout person. She's got it much worse than me because she's got to wear it for 8 hours a day or whatever her shift is. And I just had to wear it for the time period I was in the store.
Sure.
You know, and when I could empathize with her and wish her a good day versus being passive aggressive about my inconvenience, that's me being who Kevin wants to be. And so for me, being okay isn't just about, I can't just get through it because I have a tendency to then, that sets me up for Kevin to pout. And I'm well practiced at pouting, and I'm really loud at it, but that's my tendency to do that if I'm just trying to get through something.
So again, I guess it just kind of comes back to, there's nothing I can do about the change that's been on us. That, you know, it's not like if I were to cut myself on my hand and get stitches and that's pain. I get the stitches, I stay, you know, I don't use my hand for a while and then it heals and it's done. But then my life just goes back to what it was. This whole thing, I'm getting the impression that this is not just a one-time event, but this is going to be something that we need to look forward in a new type of situation with the reorder, correct?
I think that's a great example of getting stitches because of a cut, and then after a certain amount of time, all you have is a faded scar from it, but nothing in your mobility in your hands changed. I think this is reminds me when you were just talking, when I had an injury a few years ago when I ruptured my quadricep tendon, and they had to reattach my quadricep to my kneecap. That even though that was 3 years ago, not only do I have the scar that's very visible, I continually, daily have to continue working with that injury, or I'm going to have I'm going to have pain. I'm going to have a lack of mobility, but I'm able to do 99% of what I did, and I'm a better person because I went through that. Because there's certain things I know now about myself, and I've changed things. You know, my workout, how I see things, how I do things. Not just about being cautious, but about actually there's certain body parts that are actually stronger now than before, because I had to change things to rehab my leg. And I think that's maybe kind of what we're talking about, that this is going to change the way that we interact with people and teach. I have, you know, individuals I interact with, and they've now used different platforms such as Zoom or whatever to interact with people, their family members across the country. That one, now they're learning, they now know how to use Zoom. Two, they're now interacting on a more frequent basis than they were before this happened.
You know, Andrea Holm kind of asked a question about what are your thoughts on PTSD from this. And before I turn it over to you, I'm kind of just reminded of my parents, or some, you know, a lot of people in here, their grandparents, or maybe even their great grandparents who went through the Great Depression. You kind of talked about 9/11 a little bit, but I know that the Great Depression had a huge impact, and not necessarily in a negative way, on my parents. In the 70s and 80s, when I was growing up, their ability to manage money, their ability to actually eat all the food in the refrigerator, and you know, all that. There were some really good things that came out of that. So can you know, kind of talking about PTSD with our kids, kind of going through this whole process, and maybe what are those opportunities maybe?
Well, let me first address the PTSD aspect,
Okay.
and I think and each person's a little bit different, because we know with the research that why did two people that got exposed to the same trauma, why did one walk away with PTSD and the other one didn't? There's some correlating factors that we can look at, but it's not, it's not always definitive why one does versus the other. But one of the things that we know is that there is a cumulative effect of trauma, and that if a person has had trauma or loss prior to this, then there's this building effect that ends up happening. And that maybe it is going to be something that we're going to have to deal with our students that come in, let alone the different types of trauma that they may have been exposed to during this time period. Domestic violence, even if it wasn't physical domestic violence, but their parents' unrest about financial matters, uncertainty about the future, just the restrictions in close quarters or whatever may be going on. And so if someone has some unaddressed, a student has unaddressed or just began addressing aspects of PTSD, this may very well bubble up some other things regarding that. There may be, I had some of my clients that were struggling with about 3 to 4 weeks into this of the shelter in process. I had some clients complaining of reoccurring nightmares, and even if it wasn't the exact same nightmare, the themes were the same. And as we did some work with that, one of the things that was common in those cases, a common thread, was their primary drug of choice had been taken from them. These are individuals that are high achievers and busy all the time, and that busyness was removed. That structure that they normally had was removed, and some of that was popping out in their unconscious in fear. And speaking to Andrea's question, that may be some of the things that may be coming up with some of our students. And so being aware of that, being aware of some of the trauma that was, and then all of a sudden that safety that they once was experiencing now has got disrupted. Even if that safety may have been them being able to go to Andrea's room, and they now, that was removed from them, and they didn't get a say in it. They didn't, and that sense of powerlessness that was happening. And I know that's a whole nother aspect of loss that some of our teachers and educators have been going through, not being able to say goodbye, not being able to say goodbye that the way they wanted to, or the way they've done for the last 20 years, in May, or all the activities that we do, let alone those students that transition and the teachers that help that transition from grade school to middle school, and middle school to high school, and to graduation. Prom,
again,
all those things.
That's I guess it comes back to my the second point that I was making is, what are the opportunities do you see in this? I'm looking at my own children, and I live in a blended family, and we have 6 kids, and the youngest, who's a very social butterfly, he is a good student, great student, but now struggling. The second youngest he's thriving. He's thriving in this environment, and he's got more choice, and he's got more control over time. Why is that? Is they just kind of going back to what you were saying before? It's just how we handle trauma differently?
Well, I think, and I think this opportunity, right, this disorder that we got thrust into, I think of educators as a whole, are also social scientists, right? We know that, the same learning style that we may be most proficient in isn't the only learning style that's best for, or teaching style is best for our students, right? So maybe in your case that you have one student that's going to thrive because of maybe, benefit, maybe a little bit more of an introvert, maybe a little bit more of a self-starter and self-monitor, and really be able to have that, to thrive in that area, where the other student may struggle because they benefit from the experiential aspect of learning, or that in-person benefits of that, or the classroom discussion about it. And so, and we're seeing that with our clients. We have some students that that earlier they were really struggling with anxiety, social anxiety, school and the classroom was in the playground and those areas, the hallways, those were traumatic for them, either because of bullying, because of social anxiety, because of different aspects. And they're now really doing well, almost to the point where they don't need counseling support because they're doing so well. They're void of symptoms. And we have other students that were doing really well who are now coming in for counseling because of the lack of structure, not being able to socialize, not being able to interact, not being able to play sports or be in the arts. And they're really struggling with it. And they're struggling with the fact that this is the first time in their life where they're not doing well. And so all these different combinations. And so what's the opportunity in that? I think the opportunity is that we now have, even though we may not have it well developed yet, but we have another tool in our toolbox to offer students with with aspects of e-learning. We're going to come out of this and we're going to evaluate what went well and what didn't go well. What things can we improve on? And we're doing that with counseling as well. We got thrust into it pretty quickly. Within 4 days, we went 100% digital counseling, and we have to, be able to start learning what different techniques can we engage to engage our clients with online that naturally would just normal conversation would just flow if we were in person. And that's working with younger students as well. I have seen the inside of their living room and family room and their space in the house that I would have never saw if we weren't doing digital counseling. But they got to show me those things, and that was something. Or doing impromptu family sessions, and these are things that we're now seeing as clinicians as opportunities that have come out of this, and tools that we can use at our disposal that we wouldn't be able to use before, or we wouldn't even look to use before.
It is interesting because as I look at the screen now and I'm seeing everybody has joined us, we're seeing everybody's living room. We're seeing kids, we've seen dogs, we've seen cats, we've seen parrots. We're seeing another side of people. Also, again, educators and me, I'll just talk for me. As an educator, I kind of went into it because I wanted to make a difference. And so sometimes though I found as a teacher, I kind of maybe tried to make too much of a difference and therefore kind of rob the ability of my students to kind of struggle through some of this. And there's the whole research on grit and resiliency. Can you kind of talk about that balance of now we can't really be there for our students face to face, but maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing right now.
Sure. I agree with you, Chris. There is my tendency is because of earlier things that I did in my career and my roles in those careers, my tendency was to want to help people by fixing things or helping them change things, or I think you may have said rescue them, right? And that was my tendency, and the research is showing, I should say, that we are having more and more young adults that are transitioning into college that are not prepared for that transition because their loving parents were helicopter parents or snowplow parents. Their desire was to remove any obstacles so that their students wouldn't struggle. The downside was that they didn't necessarily build the resiliency to know how to overcome the obstacles that they're gonna face. And now they're away at university and learning for the first time, being exposed to that for the first time.
Yeah.
I know for me that was something that I had to struggle with my young adults, of how to be aware of and be present for their struggle, but not jump in too soon, but let them know that I was still there. And I think that there is that same opportunity that's coming now, that we can look at resiliency not just being one when there's major traumatic things that happen. That isn't the only time that we're getting knocked down. for me, who was not very strong in math, that
Mhm.
there was a fear of failure and not being good enough when it came to math, and then also a fear of letting anybody know that that was the case. So my solution to that back when I was in high school was avoidance of math.
Yeah.
And so I never developed confidence or a competency with math because of that avoidance. So I
Yes.
never built any resiliency around that. And unfortunately, I never had anyone really coach me well through that I could have used other setbacks as examples that maybe, Kevin, with a little bit of coaching or instruction, you can do the same thing with math as you did with football or weightlifting or whatever it may have been. And I think, to me, the resiliency, and then resiliency being seen as a lifestyle, not just in events, is really kind of the key in that piece that we talked about with not only mental health issues, but then also just learning in general.
It's so, again, if I'm summarizing just our conversation just a little bit, is we had no control over the change. Our order has been disordered, and the reorder is going to be a different life. It's going to be a different lifestyle. There's going to be some good things coming, but there's a whole process of grieving that we're kind of going through. It's okay to accept that. But what does some of the research say about, that new lifestyle and the lifestyle with dealing with change? Is there any research out there that can help support us?
Well, I at least what I'm going to be going back to is what I was referring to with Campbell's work, with that template, with Kessler and Ross's work, that aspect of the disorder that we go through the grieving process, acknowledge where I'm at in it, acknowledge my loss, my personal experience with that loss, experiencing that, and then as I'm managing those different stages going through that. And that aspect has been, pretty clear as far as the research with that. For me, the other thing that kind of popped in my mind when you were just talking about this is that my background, according to Ancestry.com and the Thanksgiving table, is that my background is Finnish. I'm from Finland. And so once I realized that and kind of embraced that, as I did some deeper dive into the Finnish people, and Finns are known for this concept called sisu. And sisu, it's SISU, is this concept of grit. How do you overcome difficult situations? How do you have the perseverance to overcome, or the grit to overcome? And Finns, obviously, they struggle with this the weather, and they've been invaded by different nations, and they've overcome that. And part of those overcoming that is adapting to the scenario. And that, for me, is another template from which I can work with, is going, okay, how do I create this resiliency and this attitude of resiliency as a lifestyle, not just I'll pull it out when something bad happens. How do I look at it as with the small things as well as the larger thing? And I think to do that, at least for me, I have to first have my own structure and my own order to my day and to my week, to my life. So for me, it starts physically. If I'm physically in discomfort, and for people that struggle with chronic pain or chronic illness, that is extremely distracting. It's gonna have heavy influence on you mentally and emotionally. And so, what things can I do regarding my own physical condition? Foods I put in my body, hydration, the amount of sleep I get, when I choose to wake up, movement, exercise, meditation, and stretching. All those things, for me, allow me to be an active part of my well-being and my self-care. And when I'm doing that, I have a greater opportunity for new information,
Mm-hmm.
for working on my emotional well-being. Meaning, if something comes up, I'm angry about something, or I'm sad, or I'm threatened by something, how can I manage that versus get lost in it? And so maybe, I'm biased because of being, a former athlete and having done, exercise for 40 years. That's a staple in my life, and I recognize that isn't the case for everyone, but it may be, what things are we doing to get, going for a walk outside, incorporating that as part of your structure of your day. I was joking around with my family the other day. It's like, I'm we were joking about how she was struggling with getting up early. And I said, yeah, because we're staying up late. That's why we're getting, we're staying up later watching movies or Netflix. Yeah, it's going to be harder to get up earlier. If we went to bed earlier, I bet we could get up earlier. In my case, I'm just sleep deprived because I'm I'm doing both. I'm staying up late and I'm still getting up at the same time. But I know that that's important for me to correct that, because I can only do that for so long. I need to get that quantity and quality of sleep as well. So I think, that element of what you're talking about is, being able to do. We know that these certain things we know work, and it's not going to be a quick fix type thing. There's not going to be that piece of it. We have to go with what works and then be open to new innovation and creativity that's coming at this time period.
We've been talking a lot of philosophy and theory and research, and I kind of want to break it down. Megan asked, she made a statement, and I really kind of want to get a little more operational specific. Her thing is, I'm looking forward to summer break for that reason. She doesn't have time for self-care. She's up really late. I mean, our new normal now has been crazy busy, learning, the struggle, summer. So Kevin, give us some specific things we can do over the summer to either prepare us for what's coming in August or what we don't know, or what can we do over the summer to recover from what we're doing? Because I know there's probably a little burnout going on. So can you give us some specific examples?
Well, let's first start, Chris, with just acknowledging how difficult this has been on probably everyone that's listening. The word that's getting overused is unprecedented time, right? And this idea that 10 weeks ago, the people that are listening were asked to do in a matter of days, put all your curriculum online and have it done by day 6 or whatever it was. Whatever it was. And that began the sprinting, right? And this constant, and then for some people that have, children at home and their college kids at home, or those are all those distractions. And where's the private, how do you do these things in the privacy aspect of it too? So I think there's been a lot of complicating factors that are not typical or normal that's been going on. And so if people are exhausted and tired and frustrated, it's because of the circumstance in which they've been, doing this, because this isn't how it was a year ago, and so I think, one, we have to acknowledge that piece, that it has been difficult, and there's been this expectation, and probably increased criticism and people being critical of what we're doing that as well. So I really feel for everyone that has been in this position and got thrust into this position. So what things can we do was your real question, right? Yes. I think, each of us have to figure out, be aware of the timeline, right? Most likely when school, when work gets wrapped up, we're going to have approximately 10 weeks or so before the August hits, right? And we don't know for sure what August is going to look like, but it will come. And for me, when I was in the education system, I knew that there was the first half of the summer and then the second half of the summer.
Yes.
And in the dividing line was usually around July 4th. Mm-hmm. And that's at least that's what my experience was. And And would have a tendency that in June or the end of May, I would have a tendency to just want to sleep in and breathe and not look at a book or not look at whatever. And next thing I know, I may have slept through June and it might be July. And then I'm scrambling, and because I'm fighting how fast summer's going at the same time, the sense of urgency that I'm not going to be prepared. So I think I learned this from my brother-in-law when we go up to our lake home. He's really good, even though I probably mentally resisted it at first. He was really good at that. We get up on either, if we're there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we get up and we work for we have coffee, we're on the deck, we do whatever, watch the lake or whatever, and then we start and we work for like 3 hours and we're done by noon. And the rest of the day is lake time. And the next morning we wake up and we do our normal morning, and then we have a built-in work time for doing the stuff for the maintenance of, or the projects around the lake. And I think for me, that allowed me to have a rhythm. I got some productivity done, but it wasn't all consuming.
Okay.
And then by the end of either the weekend or the month or whatever it was, there was things that were done, but it wasn't a sprint to get it all done one weekend and then have to recover for the rest of the month. And so how do we build in that balance for us? I mean, some people are going to be different. They're going to have different ways of doing it, and we each have to do our own thing. But I think the other element that I'd really encourage people to do is some things are going to get disrupted. Like we can't go on that vacation to this place because of whatever reasons. What things could I explore? What things could I, check out and do? I can still go and do things. What could that be? I know a few weeks ago, the family was together. We had a couple people from our extended family with us, and somebody came up with the idea of playing charades. And so I have my young adult family members as well as my older family. We're playing for the 7 of us or 6 of us or whatever it was. We play for 3 hours charades. There is no way in the world we would have ever played that in a different time period. We just wouldn't have done it because we would have been other circumstances. So I think it's building in that structure so that we can do those activities, because we're going to benefit as much as starting a new hobby and what comes out of doing that could be just as much that we bring back to our students as doing some research on something.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. We got about 20 minutes or so to kind of open up for some questions. I just want to remind everybody also that this August 12th, save the date, we're going to actually kind of use all this information that we have for some specific answers and kind of plan around a summit for you to get some specifics heading into the next school year. So we appreciate your chat, but we want you to save the date, and we're going to invite everybody back here to a summit with Kevin and his team to kind of help us with a little bit more practical steps of how do we move forward in this new normal. So anybody out there that has a question? I know Shane, you had a question about what can leaders do. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, and I want you to ask that question of Kevin. We got the pro here, so I'm going to unmute you and go ahead, and if you want to expand on your question, that'd be great. Okay. Here you go, Shane.
Sure. Hey, Kevin. I would just had asked. I'm a principal of the school, and just had asked, how do we as school leaders help kind of guide our staff through the grieving process to get them through it so that they're equipped to help, and then how do we help equip them to support our families and our students who might be stuck in that grieving process?
Sure. Well, I think actually, Shane, I think you're definitely right now already on the right path just by the fact that you're already acknowledging that they're experiencing loss, right? And I think that, to me, I think that's the key as leaders. We have to get the temperature of our staff, and if that is, and in this case it is, in your case, that is where they're at, then one, acknowledge it, and then how do we set up a space for them to be able to know that they're not alone, and how do we kind of maybe process that either together as a whole, as a collective whole, or in pockets, but for them to be able to kind of lean into each other, maybe a little bit, and again, I don't know how the size of staff that you have or the size of the building you have, but I know that with some other districts I've worked with, or the buildings I've worked with, what they've set up is kind of like a workshop style where they've acknowledged it, and then in their, in the English department or in the math department or whatever, then they were, or by grade level, if it was an elementary school, that they were able to spend some time just processing amongst each other, just to acknowledge that. And it's amazing what will come out of that regarding their own ideas or innovation with that. But I think sometimes as leaders, we just have to take their temperature, acknowledge it, create space for them, and they themselves may be able to come up, and then give them permission to do that if it's appropriate to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else that has a question while we have Kevin secured for you right now? And just so you know, I'm a past middle school teacher, and I've got the wait time I've got amazing wait time. Do you want to put your questions in the chat? Oh, there's Pamela, were you raising your hand? All right, I'm going to unmute you, Pamela. Go ahead.
I put a question in way at the beginning about, what I keep thinking about is Spanish flu. I live near a cemetery, and there's actually people in there that died of the Spanish flu. But we don't think about the Spanish flu anymore, and we don't act like we have to avoid flu where we have it up until now. So I always think this too shall pass. Maybe it's going to be bumpy, but can't we all agree that this too shall pass? We can't, I can't envision a world where we can't touch each other, or we can't talk to each other, or we can't, maybe we're not going to be able to have samples of food at the grocery store anymore, but so can you talk to that a little bit?
Pam, I think you're 100% right, and because of how the Rockford area had been so impacted by the Spanish flu, I have done a little bit of looking into that and how that was similar but different from what we're experiencing now. And I know Chris had mentioned the depression, and we're talking almost a decade we were impacted by the Great Depression, and I really hope this doesn't last 10 years. But there was an element of getting back to a new normal or a reorder with that. More recently, I think it was the 9/11, and we were impacted by that, and air flight was crippled. There not only did airlines have to merge because of bankruptcy and all those different types of things, but our fear of travel via airline was very high. But one of the things that came from it was that even though we may have initially been fearful and then later inconvenienced because of security going on, it became like, for my children, they don't know any different. They don't know. They just know that we go 2+ hours ahead of time to O'Hare before we travel. And you figure out ways of navigating through that and how to prepare for that. And I agree with you, Pamela. I think that is going to be, in some ways, kind of a guideline or template of what's going to be happening here. We just are on the early end of it. It's, as long as it's been, unfortunately, it's only been 10 weeks. It's really on the early end. And as we know, it's been 10 weeks, and probably the biggest thing that this shelter in has done is it's given researchers a better understanding of what the enemy is. They've had more time, the medical community's had more time to see what it is versus what it isn't, and what they could do with it and what does work. 10 weeks ago, we were exercising control by collecting mounds of toilet paper and bottled water, which didn't necessarily seem to be relevant to a respiratory illness, but it was a way of being in control, or try to have some control. Well, you can get a lot of toilet paper now. I mean, even though you're limited to 2, it's on the shelves. So that part's passed. And so I think you're right, Pam. I think there's elements of this will pass. We will adapt. And as far as educators, because I remember working with another school district, and we were talking about what do we need to do to prepare for August, and we thought then we were going to come back in May, and I go, the discussion will have to be that we're going to have a discussion about it, but there'll be another 10 weeks of data that we're collecting and information that we'll have by August to give us more insight about what's actually going to be happening now. But I do agree with you, Pam. We will get through this, and we will come on the other side. We just got to go through this part right now, and the story that we're going to tell then is the story that we're writing now. Go ahead, Chris.
We have a couple of questions that came through, and the first one is from Rebecca, but Rebecca, it kind of wraps up into the question I think that Shanna asked. Shanna, I'm going to go ahead and mute you first, and if you kind of unpack your question, it touches upon a lot of things, a lot of themes that were spoken to today, and some questions came up. So if you can expand on that, you got the floor.
Sure. I was saying earlier that I was at the grocery store yesterday, and this guy came around the corner with his cart, and had it been a month ago, it would have been no big deal. We would have had an exchange, like, no worries, how are you doing today? But he literally looked at me with this look of fear, darted with his cart the other way, and went down a completely opposite aisle that he had no intentions or need to be in. And it was at that moment that I was thinking about just this disconnectivity that has been established through social distancing guidelines. And I'm just kind of wondering, how, while honoring those and making sure that our staff feel safe when we do return to school, there are some kids, and I'm a hugger, and there are some kids that come to me and that's all that they're looking for. How do we give our staff guidance on how to be mindful of the message and the nonverbals that they're sending our kids while still kind of fostering those connections that are so important?
Yeah, thanks, Shanna. And that kind of goes right to Rebecca's question also. Do you have ideas for building community when there's been so much distrust and separation? So, Kevin, this is a huge one, and it's all you.
I think Shana, that my first kind of thought, and maybe we touched on it earlier, was this idea that we still have to be true to who we are. We may have to modify or adapt how that is. Initially, us huggers may not be able to hug because of the social distancing and inappropriateness. And I want to think that I can fist bump. If nothing else, I can definitely elbow bump, right? I mean, I may have to figure out, because my intention of an elbow bump clearly is meant that I want to fist bump if you know what I mean? And so I think it's that intention there, and also for us to be, when we're in, like you were at the grocery store yesterday, you didn't intend on startling that gentleman, and there may be something going on with him that we don't even know what's happening with that, and how do we not take that personal, but how does Shana still be Shana, and so smiling, when we're driving down the road and we inadvertently, or we're at the stoplight and we don't leave right when the light turns green and someone honks at us. It's always better for me to wave and smile at it than for me to get angry about it, because I didn't intentionally not go. So how do we stay who we are through that? And that's going to be easier said than done sometimes. And then how do we adapt to initially some of those limitations? But kind of going with what Pamela said, some of those things I think are going to change and go back to familiar. And other things are probably may have gone by the wayside. We may not have certain things. And then regarding, I think, Rebecca's question regarding community, I've seen some pretty amazing things that have been from a community standpoint, how people have become creative regarding celebrating birthdays for kids, celebrating, graduations for older ones, regarding having the police and fire come by and doing parades that way, being able to do different things. I think, for a while there was ways of expressing community through hearts on windows and different innovative things. And I think the difficult thing about the longevity of this is that we can come out of the gate with some strong things like that, but it's hard to keep that momentum up. And so how do we persevere and discipline ourselves if we start something, push through that? At our office, we started 7 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago online, that every Wednesday is a theme day. And so, last week was superheroes. So you had to wear something with a superhero outfit. And this week is, recognition of Memorial Day and veterans. And so maybe it's not going to make all the difference in the world, but it's a way for us at KP to be able to be that community and then reach out to not only our clients, but when I put it out on social media, I think there's just what ways can we kind of reach out and be part of that community within the limitations that we do have.
Tim had a question before early in the session. Tim, I'm going to unmute you. Did that kind of help support the question that you had?
Yeah, definitely. One of my big concerns with the CDC's recommendations for going back to school, another principal and I were talking about it this morning, and some of the preliminary guidelines of, one kid in a row on a school bus and have to skip every other. And some of these things are not necessarily realistic, but there are definitely some things that we're going to have to implement, like not sharing manipulatives or other supplies or one-way aisles in the hallway, things along those lines. It seems like it's going to be very difficult when we do go back for school to be at the forefront educating kids. And it's going to end up being an afterthought to trying to help students cope with these new expectations and guidelines that they're going to have to maneuver on a daily basis. And we're going to have to try and police ourselves. So I think just educating kids is going to be a challenge, even more so than it is now remotely.
Yeah. Tim, I am experiencing that personally here at the office. We're looking at June 1st. We've been able to, because we're essential, we've been able to be open this whole time, but for 8 weeks we haven't been because of everything that you said, specifically the perceived fear of clients not wanting to come. It was just easier to just not come because we could do digital counseling instead. And now looking at the idea of having a slow opening from that as we can roll out. And what is interesting, and I think we're going to know more come July, or at least by the end of July. I think we're going to have the recommendations today may not be necessarily the recommendations come July. We're going to have more information about transmission. We're going to have more information about how this virus actually is versus how we think it is. So that may help guide it. And it's also what's going to be, because it also needs to be realistic application for us, right? Because we actually have to make this happen. It can't be just somebody writing it down on a piece of paper for us about what's ideal, but what's realistic for us. And I don't know necessarily what that is, but I know that, with us, and this is like we're 10 days away from it, you know, I asked my therapist, it's a smaller group, I only have 30 therapists, and I was asking them, and their biggest concern that they have is how am I going to counsel for 10 hours a day with a mask on? And so we all acknowledge that, you know, and then the one guy said, well, what about wearing a face shield? And so we're looking into that as a way. We know we have the distance, 6 to 8 feet, and then, you know, all those things and how we're going to check people in. But we're trying to, with a select group of people, we're trying to work on what's going to be the best possibility and recognize that we're going to have to adapt as it opens up. But you're right. Whatever we do has to be sellable to my staff because they're the ones who are going to have to enforce it. So we have to be working with them, keeping them in the loop about what's going on. But yeah,
I could imagine communication, over communication, and very specific communication. A good communication structure is going to be a key for all staff who are rolling through this.
Yeah, and hopefully, Tim, that we're going to have, and I think we will have more information because a friend of mine runs, the outdoor activities for camps and things like that. And she works for, the park district and she's like, how are we going to enforce having 5-year-olds keep masks on while they're playing outside? And I don't know. But so it's those questions. So I think it's a very real thing that you're talking about. Hopefully we'll have more information about what is not only what's ideal, but what's needed.
I'm going to go ahead and unmute Andrea. She's got a really good question for you. Andrea, it's all you.
I just wanted to bring up the idea, I guess, of, you could say, of mindfulness. I know that's a real buzzword these days, but it's really essentially just being grounded and being aware of what's happening right here and right now instead of way off into the future or in the past. And I think that this is a really great opportunity, a way to find meaning in all of this, that we can develop and really actually use mindfulness as a community. I know in RPS it's kind of a struggle to get that mindset going. So I'm wondering, Kevin, if you have any words on that and how we could build that in our school communities.
Well, Andrea, I know, we've known each other for a little bit, and if anybody wants to, Andrea did a great job on my podcast, and she did a great job telling her story. But I think, Andrea, that, being able to, the more individual educators that we talk to about the benefits of that mindfulness, and how to utilize it within the classroom, and how to adapt it for the different age groups. And because I think there's a lot of times, as you know, that people they don't understand what that really is. And so their misconception leads to an avoidance of putting in tools of practicing that. And I know even for myself, who thought they were practicing it for a long time, when I went to a workshop about it, I recognized that I was making it way too hard on myself. And that it's really about what we mentioned earlier about the grieving process, is that, that giving people permission to just be aware of and acknowledge where they're at, and then and feel that feeling, and non-judgmentally be able to be there. And then what are we going to do to manage that? Not just make it go away, but manage that. And I think being able to not only talk about it, but then show examples, I think that's kind of the key. And then at some point, it'll be more people doing it, so then it'll catch on its own self with momentum with it. That the majority will take over, type of thing. It'll be easier for it to happen. But right now, we're still on the starting end of that and introducing that.
Sure. Thank you very much, Andrea, for sharing that. We're going to go ahead and wrap up. We're going to send out a link to you for the evaluation so you can get your PDCs. But a mentor of mine used to say to us, when we show up for a certain camp, he'd look at us and just say, way to go. You know, you're out there, you're doing this, and you showed up, you're here. And I just want to leave you with that encouragement as well. Just way to go, everyone, with what's been going on and how much thought you're putting into what is this going to mean in the fall. So again, I just want to just to thank you for coming, and go ahead, take a little bit and fill out the evaluation. We're going to take all that information and incorporate it into something a little bit more specific and more helpful for you coming in August. So again, thank you so much for coming, Kevin.
You know, I mentioned something earlier, and I think this is important for us to be mindful. This is a historical time period. There's no doubt that 2 years from now, 5 years from now, we're going to remember 2020 because of this. And I think with that being said, being mindful, as Andrea talked about, that the story that we're going to tell in a year from now or 6 months from now is a story that we're actually writing right now. The story that you're going to tell in August when your kids come back is the story that you're writing today and in June and in July. And that gives us, that mindfulness will give us some choice. And there is opportunities for adaptivity and creativity and innovation. And the fact that you guys are willing to be part of that, you're making history. You're probably not going to get any bonuses right now, so don't hold your breath on that right now. But who knows what'll come out of this? We may not get that immediate feedback, but you know, each one of you are doing what you can do to be a light in someone else's darkness by working on your own light first. So thank you.
Take care, everybody. I'm going to leave the page open for a little bit longer so you can get into that link. But again, thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and hopefully see you in August.